we'll get started soon. Just give people a few more moments, and I'm looking for something in my email. Okay, I'm going to grab some water, and it is 9 o'clock, so we'll get started. You inspired me. Oh. Hopefully positively. Okay. Good morning, everyone. Really glad to see everybody. I will say this is the kickoff to our annual pledge campaign, and I am not going to be asking for money in this presentation, while I realize that might have scared some people away. Actually, when I preached a couple months ago, someone came up to me afterwards and they said, "I thought you were going to get up and ask for money." Because that's often what I do when I get up in church, but I'm trying to, branch out and try new things. And so today, we're going to be just talking about economic thought, economies, our kind of sacred texts, and what they have to say about the concept of economy. And so we're just going to explore that. And I want to preface that I am not an expert. I am just someone who is very curious and interested in a lot of these things. I will say 20-some years ago, when I was in school, one of my final papers was on neoliberal economics and immigration and what the church's response should be to that. And so I will say, the intersection of economics, the intersection of economy and how we build our common life is something I really find interesting, and also how the church connects and responds to that. And I even included All Saints in my paper, and that was 20 years ago, about the work All Saints was doing, and stuck around. All right. So when you hear the word economy, what comes to mind for you? And I'm going to grab the mic, and we can raise your hand. So when you hear the word economy, and you could, here, and the mic is mostly for our folks online.
Oh.
Yeah.
Money.
Money.
Period. Money.
Great. How about you, Catherine? What do you think?
Oh, what I think? Maybe the stock market.
Okay. I'm just going to go around.
No, I think of two things. I'm making do with what I have and some global capitalism.
Okay. And you can pass if you want.
Ditto.
exchanging something of value for something else of value.
All right. So the question is, what do you think of when you hear the word economy?
Financial structures.
Okay.
Distribution of resources.
Go with him.
All right. Tom?
Money. Someone already said it.
Yeah. Money. How about you, Vicky?
When I was younger, my dad would talk on and on about economics, and it bored me to tears. And now I am so curious and interested, and I wish I could talk to him now.
Oh, yeah. Well, I hope I don't bore you to tears, but yeah. And when we have experiences, they kind of change our interest and curiosity, and thank you for sharing that. All right. How about you, John?
Thinking about my personal spending habits. Am I spending too much, too little? Yeah.
Yeah.
Financial management.
I always think of trade and purchases of goods individually and globally.
Yes.
I didn't get any further than money.
Great. All right, Terry.
The first thing that came to my mind was savings.
Savings, yeah. Okay. Thank you all for that. And great participation, by the way, 100%. Okay, so there's lots of things. We heard money, distribution, markets, personal habits. So quite a broad understanding, but also pretty specific to financial. So we are going to go back to ancient Greece, and the root of the word oikos, which I put in my presentation title and told some of you that was a silly thing to do because it probably meant nothing to many people. So for ancient Greeks, especially Aristotle, the economy wasn't just about money. It was about how to live well together in the household, which then extended to the polis, which is the city. So in ancient Greece, it was the household and how you managed your household was what then extended in how you kind of managed the city. But there was a lot more emphasis on the household. Oikos means the home, the family, which is the foundation of the city during that time. Oikonomos, think of economics, is the ordering of the household. So oikos, household, nomos, which means law, order. So the ordering of the household, that is the root of the term economics. And Aristotle distinguished oikonomia, management for household flourishing, economy, from chrematistics. We can all try to say that, which was wealth accumulation for its own sake. And so Aristotle was someone who often talked about the common good and virtue and how do we explore that. And he, of course, expanded that in his incessant questioning into the economy and the household. And a lot of that surrounded the idea of moral and virtue and character and how you order your household points to kind of virtue. And that in turn then is an example to the polis or to the city. And so I want to also look, so we're looking at ancient Greek, but I want to look at Eastern thought too, and not just Western thought when we think of how they were looking at economics. And actually, I'm going to, pull this off. Okay, so a little kind of example. So the Greek concept, human flourishing, the moral principle was virtue and moderation. In Confucian thought, social harmony was kind of the goal of economic life, with benevolence and reciprocity. In the Hindu tradition, living in accordance with Dharma, which was duty and right livelihood. Buddhist tradition, inner peace and self-sufficiency, which was the moral principle was compassion and contentment. And then Islamic economic life, stewardship of God's resources justice, and charity. So recognizing many different traditions, if we think of kind of the economy or economics as being kind of that core root, the household, you start to look at what is the goal of economic life through a lens of moral clarity. And we are just going to be doing kind of a fun, like broad dance with thinking about economics. I want to stop and talk about the biblical vision, economic vision. So looking at covenant principles, and a lot of this comes from when I was preaching a few weeks ago, I talked about an author, Marcia Pally, and she has a book called Economics, Covenant and Commonwealth, and she looks at the idea of economics, the covenant theory in Scripture, and the Commonwealth. So starting in Genesis, creation as gift and trust, with the economic implication, we are stewards, not owners. And then we move into Exodus, where the covenant with God is introduced, and that freedom exists within mutual responsibility. So thinking about how that relates to our economic life, that there's a level of mutual responsibility. And then the concept of jubilee and rest, that principle that comes out of Leviticus. And the concept of jubilee and rest brings up debt forgiveness, brings up what is a rhythm of rest and renewal for all people. And we won't dive too much, but if you engage the concept of jubilee, where debts are forgiven, land is restored, that is a very central concept in Christian and Jewish teaching. Then moving to prophetic justice in Amos and Micah. That true worship demands fairness and mercy. So as we start to think about what are some core expectations, some core moral principles when we think about our economic life, that importance of fairness and mercy. And then finally, as we get into the New Testament, we don't even dive into the Gospels because, we know in the parables, Jesus is constantly talking about economic life and a reordering of relationships of power that are often rooted in economic experiences. And then in the New Testament, in the epistles, we have the commonwealth or koinonia, which koinonia is a term that means fellowship, but not just like having coffee after church, but like really fellowship that is about bondedness, solidarity, and a shared economic life, where they're a community of shared gifts and belonging. So in the book of Acts, right, we hear about how the early church had all things in common. In many ways, the early church emerged as an alternative movement to the powers of the Roman Empire. And when Jesus says, when someone comes to Jesus, Caesar asks for a tax, like, should we pay the tax? And Jesus says, give unto Caesar what is Caesar's, but give unto God what is God's. Well, if everything is God's, what do you give to Caesar, right? And so he's always kind of playing around with that. And then in Acts, we hear about they had all things in common. A lot of widows, orphans, caring for the most vulnerable. But we also have a story about Lydia, right, who was a wealthy patron. And we know that she was a wealthy patron because they described her purple garments. And what she did was she wanted to be a part of this church. She wanted to be a part of this community. And what Paul encouraged her to do was to share her resources with the community to create a common good. So I'm going to pop back, but I have a question. Which of the principles that we were looking at, stewardship, responsibility, rest, justice, shared life, so koinonia, jubilee, prophetic justice, which of these most inspires or challenges you? So stewardship, inspires or challenges? Both. What else? Shared life. Inspires or challenges? Challenges. Okay, say more.
Well, it just seems that economics is so diverse now. How can you make it fair?
So economics is so diverse now. How can you make it fair? Yes, great. And we'll talk a little bit about that. That is a great, great question. Anyone else?
My issue would be justice. I'm get emotional about it because, we've got so many people starving in Gaza and in Palestine. At the same time, we want to be able to send money into those different charitable groups. We also need really good representatives who will push justice as their agenda in Congress. So who do we serve? That's my, and how do we make that happen?
Yeah, so that concept of justice and responsibility sounds challenging.
I was going to say responsibility because where does my personal responsibility end, and what is the community's responsibility? And then the circle keeps getting larger and larger.
That is great. Great question about, where does our own responsibility end and where does it begin with others? And how do we navigate that? Wonderful. Anyone else? I'm going to go Gabriel and then back to you.
I'd say rest, because in our current neoliberal order, we're frantically chasing money and social status. And there is a built-in precarity where if I quit my job, I won't have health insurance and so on. And so even if you could physically rest for a moment, you couldn't mentally.
My thought is that the framework that you've given us leaves out the concept of economics as a science, and it's a study of the way things actually work. It's like supply and demand, and it's bigger than you are, and you have no impact whatsoever. So the idea of the family ordering is in the context of a world of like gravity, and you can just do the best you can. So and even now, Pope Leo is talking about how wealth is is an illusion. But he didn't really say how you get the globe to work, and that's what perplexes me. The challenge is, how do you make it work when the framework is beyond you?
Yeah, thank you. So helpful. And I think we'll touch a little bit on that and absolutely no answers to that. Yeah. Okay, anyone else? All right. Oh, yes. Thanks, Terry. I see you.
Well, that whole Hebraic concept of the Jubilee year, where we stop and forgive debts and redistribute the land, never happened.
Yeah, it's super challenging. Isn't it interesting that our sacred scriptures and our stories really put things in front of us that feel almost impossible to do? Kind of like the resurrection. Seems like, really? Is that possible? Yes.
So I just want to follow up on what Terry just said, because I'm ignorant about the Jubilee. So you're saying that was, historically it never happened?
And the idea was that every 50 years it would happen, so that the landowners would give back land that they had taken. They would forgive the debts to people. It didn't happen.
Yeah, so we're really, it's something we wrestle with. And I think maybe the question is then, what do we do, right? and because it is part of our shared story, and what are the lessons that kind of lead us into our journey as a community of faith. So I want to do a very brief journey from Christendom to capitalism. The medieval church saw economy as moral stewardship. And I'm going to be clear, this is not saying this is the example we want to follow, just this is a descriptive. The church fathers, Augustine, Basil, Chrysostom, saw wealth as a means of justice, not self-enrichment. Now, again, back to Jubilee, doesn't mean they didn't practice self-enrichment, but conceptually, in like their writings, that was how the economy was seen. Thomas Aquinas taught that charging excessive interest was sinful because it exploited the poor. Then we have the Reformation, which elevated vocation. Right, Martin Luther talked about, if you're a dairymaid, be a dairymaid for the glory of God, which, yeah, like I love that, because so often we feel that the spiritual life, especially at that time, was rooted in very specific vocations like that of religious orders, the priesthood, and Martin Luther, which is part of our own, history, along with Henry, elevated vocation that all labor is dignified and is for the glory of God. But it also helped to secularize the economic life. It started to begin to create kind of distance between the church, the economy, and economic life. And then we move into industrial and modern eras. And that's where we get the rise of markets, right? This did not always exist. Trade existed, but how we understand modern markets is something more recent. And also the rise of industry. Part of that was technology, changes in technology, and individualism. Identity and the individual as a concept did not exist forever. It is something that is relatively recent in our history as a species. This created enormous prosperity for many, not for all, but also a lot of fragmentation. So what do I mean by fragmentation? I think we'll kind of get into a little bit of that in some of the next slides, but the idea of fragmentation is that we begin to become individuals, we become our fragmented selves. With the markets, capitalism, consumerism, now we could talk about, and we'll talk a little bit about the attention economy, or even what we pay attention to is fragmented. It's not all the same. Like how we form ourselves as a community is often more fragmented than it was historically. And I'm not putting a value judgment on that necessarily, maybe a little, because no time in life was perfect. Let's just be honest. And there were different ways we organized ourselves. And as we got into the more industrial and modern era, we became more fragmented in how we organized. And instead of kind of human organizing, it really became the markets in some ways were organizing human life. So this is fun. Let's look at modern economic systems, promise and peril. My personality is to be like, here's information and here's like the highs and the lows versus like this is good and this is bad. So just know that about me. You are allowed to like hate something. You can be a hater about anything, but I'm not going to do that today. So capitalism, which is what we're experiencing now. A sort of capitalism. There's so much subsidies in the world. I'm like, ha, 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 capitalism, sure. It's not truly a free market. The government is very involved and is becoming more involved. Gifts, innovation, creativity, and freedom. It really did bring kind of a level of innovation, creativity. Competition is not bad in and of itself. It can create a lot of good things. But what happens is that it also created inequality and commodification, especially if there's no way to balance, who has access to be able to do that creativity and innovation, and that capitalism needs moral limits and stewardship in order to lean into its better self. Socialism, gifts, equality, and care for the vulnerable, challenges inefficiency and loss of agency. It honors justice, but risks coercion. So basically that idea of like everyone is kind of doing the same thing and has the same thing, and it doesn't really kind of push folks to want to experience, like, doesn't matter to like try to have a creative idea if like it's gonna go nowhere. Democratic socialism balances freedom and justice. So it's that idea of looking at the market and finding ways for the government to get involved in managing that access so that more people have access to healthcare, to lower rents. The challenges is that there can be too much bureaucracy or government overreach. And then it just gets stuck and goes nowhere. It can embody solidarity and freedom in its best form. Marxism, one of the gifts, is a prophetic critique of exploitation. One of the challenges, it reduces us to just the material. It's all about the material life and not the spiritual life. It calls for justice but lacks transcendence. And then, so covenantal vision, this is not really an economic system. It might be practiced more in Amish communities or smaller, like it truly is like small household economics. It's a little bit more connected to that biblical vision. It's about relational responsibility to one another. Its challenge is it is hard to sustain at scale, which is why we don't see it expanding, because it is so demanding on our relational life. Because freedom is bound up in love and community, and it's about our responsibility to one another, and that is hard to grow to scale. And the economy is changing more, especially with the advent of the internet and social media. So you all might have heard the term market economy, gig economy, attention economy. Let's see, and I have some notes here to give a little bit more. So in the market economy, goods and services are exchanged through price and competition. One of its strengths, again, is innovation, efficiency, and prosperity. The risk is it turns all relationships into transactions. And people are not people or humans, they are just a transaction. The relationship what you have with someone is just a transaction. The gig economy, it's flexible. This is like ride share, like Uber, delivery, freelancing, right? A lot of contract work. Flexible, task-based work. A strength is independence and opportunity. The risk is, that says precarity, loss of vocation, insecurity, isolation, erosion of community and vocation. How do we find dignity and belonging in work that's temporary or invisible? And then the attention economy, which is one that people are talking about a lot more now. And that is, they talk about especially how politics are happening now, that it's no longer how much money you can give to a political candidate, it's how they can capture your attention through social media. And that's what we've seen with the rise of Zoran Mandami in New York, was that he has mastered the attention economy. It is digital platforms that profit by capturing and selling human attention. And I'm not saying he's doing that, but he knows how to use it. So again, digital platforms profit by capturing and selling your attention. The strength, there's connection, there's creativity. People are having fun figuring out how to capture your attention. The risk is distraction, addiction, addiction to your apps, addiction to the news, addiction to, whatever might be capturing your attention. Your presence is commodified. The time you spend with your attention moving from this to that, it is being commodified because there's money behind a lot of these social media platforms. A loss of Sabbath. When attention itself becomes currency, how do we stay rooted in God's time? Was a really interesting quote I read. Okay, so here's a question for you all. Which of these economies shapes your daily life most? How do they form what you love, how you spend time, and how you see others? I'm going to let you kind of sit with that. So I'm going to say it again. And I'm actually, if any of you want to share, you can, but this is something more just to sit with yourself. Which of these economies shapes your daily life most? The market, the gig, the attention economy. How do they form what you love, how you spend your time, and how you see others? So just kind of sit with that a little bit. And some may feel more impacted than others.
Since I'm retired, it's the attention economy, because I have all these hours every day, and where am I going to put my attention? And right now I'm struggling between, they say one of the things to have a healthy life in retirement is to be socialized. But then if you went to the Sabbath thing that Tim gave, you need time to not feel like you have to go to all these things. And so finding a balance of my attention.
Thank you. Anyone else?
I would say the market economy has the most impact on me because I have to trade my enormous amounts of time and energy in order to furnish my life. So I feel like it takes me away from the things that I love and from people. Although I do my best within the work world to have as much connection, try to bring some sense of excellence to what I'm doing, but I would not do it for a minute if I wasn't forced to. I wanted to add one challenge about the attention economy that I've been thinking about a lot, which is the danger of extreme ideological capture. So religious and political capture that looks very cultish without a cult leader per se, but through algorithms and so on.
I guess I'll speak to all three of those. Market economy is where I spent most of my life, literally in the markets, capital markets, working for a Wall Street firm and later as a trader for a hedge fund. I've been post-career since 2019. One of my first experiences in the attention economy was in fundraising. Somebody asked me to fundraise for something, and they wanted me 30% increase over the prior year. It was 440%. Actually. So that was my first experience doing something completely social media. Works, but there's definitely downsides to social media. Gig economy, since I have lots of time on my hands since 2019, I work 70 to 90 hours probably, driving Uber and Lyft because I can, because I like it. And I always felt limited in the market economy. A lot of the companies I'd work for, you can't work more than 12 hours a day or whatever. I can absolutely, and that's what I choose to do. I've done it 3 years, 13,000 rides. So I have no lack of socialization because I talk a lot. So, and half the people talk.
Thank you, Tom. I see other hands, but I'm actually going to keep us moving because we're going to hit time. But, we can stay after to talk a little bit more. I want to go back to a little bit to what Gabriel said about concern about ideological capture and the attention economy. And Because what I wanted to say about that, actually, that was a great transition. So these new economies that we're looking at, especially the attention economy, remind us that economy and economics isn't just finance, it's formation. We are being formed by something. We are always being formed by something. And at the very least, our responsibility is to at least be aware of what is forming us. And part of our faith communities are to help us kind of tap into understanding that and imagine what does an alternative formation look like. So I want to bring in 3 theological lenses to these concepts, these conversation around economics and economy. And again, this is so big, broad, very specific in one direction. There is so much more that can be said. I want to just name that. So the first is a theologian, Daniel Bell Jr. He's written several books, but one was called The Economy of Desire. And he talks about how markets, again, this is formation, shape what we love, but faith reorders our desire. So a lot of what he talks about is what are we being taught to want by the world around us? And how are we inviting our liturgical practices, our community practices to reshape us through a lens of faith? Marcia Pauly, who I mentioned earlier in her book, Commonwealth and Covenant, talks about freedom. It's relational. That covenantal relationship we have with one another is sustaining. Basically, economics isn't just about money or markets. It's about how we organize our relationships. How do our choices sustain or erode our relationships? And again, this is going back to that original concept of household, right? That the original term, the original concept of economics was about the household. It was relational. And over time, it has moved into a non-relational market. Miguel Escobar, who currently just recently became ordained as an Episcopal priest in the East Coast, wrote a book called The Unjust Steward. And he talks a lot about mercy and redistribution. How do we use worldly systems creatively to practice grace, not accumulation? How do we use systems to practice mercy and redistribution, but creatively, recognizing we live in a real world with real limits? And we could dive into any one of these, and we won't. So, reclaiming oikos. And I'm talking about us reclaiming oikos because oikos is really rooted in that biblical vision as well. And so this is an opportunity for us to look at any system that we are a part of and ask, what are the ends of this system? What good is this system aiming for? What is the formation that this economy, this system is creating? What kind of people is it shaping us to be? Looking at relationship. Does it strengthen community or isolate us? Justice. How do we treat the vulnerable and creation? And then finally, worship. What does it teach us to love the most? Right? That concept of worship is about where we orient our love. What does it teach us to love the most? The economy is a moral and spiritual practice, not just a financial one. The call of stewardship today is to imagine ways of being God's household in a fragmented world. And the parable of the unjust steward, which was preached on a few weeks ago, reminds us that grace can subvert even unjust systems. And the unjust steward, just briefly, was the one who, when he found out he was going to get fired by his the master, he went and to all of his people that owed money to the master. He was kind of the middle person, and he forgave all the debts, or forgave the extra interest he had put on top of it. And so while he wasn't, living in the ideal world of household economics, he was reminding us that we can still subvert the system, and it doesn't always come from a place of, well, goodness. But when we're in unjust systems, there's creativity that can be had. Our task is not to escape the world's economies, but to use them creatively to build relationships of mercy within them. So, questions to consider. How does our liturgy form or transform our economic imagination through Eucharist and prayer and other practices? Some talk about Eucharist as being kind of the, like, an example economy of, like, the table fellowship, the idea that you come, like, kind of like the theological concept of, you know, like, coming to the table, of being fed, and then going out into the world to feed others. How do we share time and resources within the body? Pastoral care, works of mercy, shared meals. How do we embody love of neighbor in our profession? Resistance against exploitation through our volunteer service in our retirement? Do we hold possessions as owners or as stewards? How does the church inspire and explore economic imagination? Okay, so I think that's it. Again, this is really just to kind of stimulate our thinking. I can see a lot of like, because I think we could take any one of these things and really unpack it. And I know at some point Keith is going to have to head out, but I am just going to open this up. I want to hear from you all. What created curiosity for you? What questions you might have? What are you concerned about? What are you interested in? Anyone want to share? I feel like you had something to say earlier, but maybe it was on a different topic.
No, I feel like the economy is something that is like the universe. It's something that you live within. And the best we can do, or out of that, is to find a place where we can live in it. So, and for example, the church is a place where that needs money, and so it's a possibility of having some kind of refuge, some escape, some area of agency within that. But it's still there, and I haven't seen, it's not prescriptive. Thinking about the economy is too big. It's like thinking about the universe. How do molecules work? And I make do out of what I can. So that was my challenge.
Thank you. I think that's a challenge for all of us. Absolutely.
I think, especially from where I am now in my life, I'm more or less retired. I think the whole idea of an attention economy really speaks to me. Just went dead. It has for a long time. I spent many years as a Quaker with a lot of consciousness of simple living and all of that. And what I really feel, my own peace of mind, integrity, and so forth, is very much about how I choose to look at news or not look at news, what kind of images come into my house and into my mind, how I allocate resources, how I maintain a kind of integrity within this state of being, and very consciously not get sucked too much into computer land or social media land or whatever. I know that's not possible for everyone, but for me, I would say it's pretty critical. It's core.
Thank you.
First, thank you. This has been very enlightening. The thing that I'm intrigued with is the idea that church for me is it's two things, and they're polar opposites in some ways. One is the sense of a refuge in a world that doesn't make any sense whatsoever. And yet also I feel like the church is also a place that is about changing the world. And there's that tension between being able to fall into the pews and being able to go out into the world to change it. And I struggle with that tension all the time.
Thank you, Patrick. I think that's a tension that a lot of people, and that may forever be the tension, right? And in some ways, tension is really important to making sure we don't get comfortable and that we stay alive and engaged. And I want just kind of on that, and Keith gave me the 1 minute mark. What I want to say too is one of the things to think about when we think about oikos, the household, is that we are in community together, and how we are in community together is like a central point in how we be community out in the world. And Adrienne Marie Brown, Margaret Watley, who talk about like it's the science of new leadership, and Adrienne Marie Brown talks about I can't remember the name of her book, but they talk about this idea of fractals, and the world is built up of fractals, and it's these little these cohorts that are related to each other, and they're not separate, they're not fragmented. So the way and as the fractal builds, it has an impact on the world around it. So the way we relate to each other here, the way we treat each other in this place, is going to have an impact on how we have an impact on the broader world. And that was the early church. The early church didn't start